topics that I've mentioned by Christians that are not only not helpful, but they are destructive to the cause of the gospel. And they don't only just hurt you and I in our spiritual lives with Christ. They hurt other members around us, and they hurt the community that we're trying to reach. Sometimes Christians of all ages can seem very angry and bitter and grumpy about all of the things that are going on in this life. And the more we focus on those negative things, the angrier and bitter and even more hateful we can become. That's why I had you turn to Leviticus chapter 19. In Leviticus chapter 19, starting in verse 17, the Word of God says, "You shall not hate your fellow countrymen in your heart. You may surely reprove your neighbor, but shall not incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." Now, I think on a first read-through, we all know what that means. But it would be a shame if we got to the part that said, well, it says not to hate your fellow countrymen. And maybe that was just talking about an Israelite, and so how that compares for us is in the church, that means just don't hate other members of the church. But that's not what it's talking about, right? If the final statement is to love your neighbor as yourself, and we come along, as one man did in the gospel story and said, well, Jesus, who is my neighbor? Well, the answer is you and I know who our neighbor is. For Beth and I, it's not just our neighbors in Madison, in our little Knox Creek community. And for the members at Somerville, it's not just the people in Somerville. It ends up being every person that I come into contact with in my life is my neighbor. And I bet if you're human like me, there are some people that you like as your neighbor, and there are some people you don't. And there are some people you don't want to have as a neighbor for anything, for any reason. But the first charge here is to not hate somebody, but to love them instead. And I think that that's very difficult for us, especially during certain times in life when we have different political views, or we have different ideas about, and we don't have to deal with this quite as much now, but whether somebody should wear a mask or not, or whether somebody should get a vaccine or not. And I'm not going to give you any of my thoughts or opinions about what somebody should do in that situation. That's not the point of the lesson. The point is that a lot of Christians and a lot of people have different opinions about those things. And some of those opinions may be wiser than other opinions. I'm not sure I'm educated enough to know which are which. But when we come to those disagreements, the way that we handle them says a lot about our walk with Christ. And the way that we handle them gives a particular example to other Christians around us and to other people in this world who we are hoping to show the love of Christ so that they can also come into the fold. I think that's what he is talking about at the end of verse 17 when he says, you may surely reprove your neighbor, but shall not incur sin because of him. You're like, well, what sin would you incur? I think the sin that you would incur is the hatred. Because as we see these things happening in the world that we don't like, and even are awful, sinful things, there are some terrible things done in our government. There's some terrible things done in this town, I'm sure, because wickedness is all around. And it is very easy for me to fill my heart with bitterness about those things. If I wake up, Lord willing, I've got Monday through Friday coming up, work days. And I can wake up in the morning and I can get on Facebook and I can get on the news and there is an endless supply of terrible things happening and things that I disagree with and things that I wish I could stop. And when I'm angry about them and I understand that I really don't have control over it, I have a tendency to get bitter about it. My whole personality changes. And sometimes that may even flow over into how I treat my wife and my child and my friends and family because I'm so angry about all the terrible things going on in the world. And I bet that if I stay bitter long enough, I can begin to justify in my heart that it is okay to hate the people that are doing these things. Because if I can convince myself, well, they're doing something that is so abominable and horrible, the only feeling I can feel for them is hate. Manasseh was like that, right? If you read the story of Manasseh, if Manasseh were a world leader today, that'd be one of the most difficult people to not hate in this life. He was a horrible person. He repented and came to God. But before that, he was one of the worst people that has ever lived on this planet and did horrible things. And yet, I'm still told, and this is hard for me to grasp, I'm still told not to hate him. Wow. How am I supposed to deal with that? Why is hatred such a big deal? I want you to turn to Proverbs chapter 10 with me. Proverbs 10:12 says this, because if we're beginning to justify in our heart that, you know what, it is actually okay for me in certain situations to hate. Proverbs 10:12 says hatred stirs up strife. It causes division. It causes arguments. It causes fights between people. There's another passage I don't have written down. I can't remember where it's at the moment. But it mentions, do not fret because of evildoers. It tends only to evil. Now here's what that means to me. If I spend a lot of my time worrying about all of the wickedness that's going on, I'm going to find myself participating in some wickedness as well. Now you might argue with me a bit on that, and that's fine, where you say, well, just because I saw something horrible on TV doesn't mean I'm going to go do that thing. I agree with you. There's plenty of wicked things I hear that I don't go participate in. But if I continue to worry about all of the wickedness that's happening, then I'm going to get what we talked about earlier. I'm going to get angry, and I'm going to get bitter, and I'm going to become hateful. Maybe not toward everybody, but certain people. And because I'm hateful, I'm going to say things, and I'm going to influence other Christians to say things that they should not say. And I'm going to, like Leviticus 19, I'm going to incur sin. When originally I just hated the sin, I end up finding myself hating the people and saying some horrible things about those people. And yet Proverbs 17:17 says this to me. A friend loves at all times. Now, everybody in this world is not my friend. And I know that. And I'm not everybody's friend. But I am supposed to attempt, and I know this not just from Proverbs, but from Jesus, to love at all times. Because I am somebody that when I was committing the sins that I was committing and when I was a horrible, evil person, Jesus still loved me and was trying to save me. Now for some of the examples that I want to share. What does this hatred look like in the lives of some Christians? Now, once again, remember, you don't have to worry about me thinking about you in particular. I don't know most of you, and I don't have you on Facebook. But I've seen some very hateful things said by Christians. It does not mean that I think that that Christian that said that is an awful person. But I think that they got caught up in all of the anger and bitterness that's going on. And as people were discussing who should be president, Christians that erred on the side of Republican and Christians that erred on the side of Democrat, I don't have an opinion right now, is they started saying some hateful things about each other. You know, it would be better if you just don't think about politics then. Now, I'm not telling you you don't have to think about politics, but what I'm saying is if Don and I disagree on which political party should be in charge, it is not going to help our walk with Christ if I call Don a fool. Now, I wouldn't call you that, Don. Anyway. But now, whether you believe this or not, or whether you've seen it or not, I've seen some Christians using these words. Well, so-and-so is stupid. And this person's an idiot. And this person's a fool. Now, I'll give you this. There are some people in this world and in the government that do some of the most wicked things that the human mind can imagine. And you may want them to stop even more than I do. But I don't know of any person, and I could be wrong, you may have an example. I don't know of any person that has been living a wicked life or doing something wrong, or even if it was just a political disagreement. I can't imagine, and Don, I'm going to use you one more time. I can't imagine Don saying something to me about politics or mask wearing or vaccines, and I say, Don, you're a fool. And Don pauses for a second, and he goes, you know what, Neil? I am a fool. I thank you that you've shown me that, and I'm ready to change right now. Now, some of you were kind of chuckling at that lightly because you know how ridiculous that sounds. Because that's not how you get people to change. And then what we do is we then say, but that person doesn't deserve me to talk to them with love and grace. You're right. You are right. I don't deserve somebody to talk to me with love and grace. You might say, well, Neil, I mean, you're a preacher of the gospel. Nope, I'm a sinner. I repented, and I'm trying to live my life right, and there are some people that aren't. But Jesus loved me when I was a terrible, sinful person. That is what drew me to Him. Because I couldn't comprehend that. I couldn't comprehend that after He had done all of these amazing things for me and had forgiven me of my sins, I could not comprehend that I then went off and lived a wicked life for 3 years of my life. And when I realized I needed to come back, that He was willing to take me back. And not only that, He was willing to take me back and not say, hey, but let me talk to you about all the horrible things that you did. I really need to use my phone for this because I've got an example picture. I want to give you a few more examples of things that I've seen on Facebook. Now, this is not a sermon about social media, and we can say these things face to face. And I'm afraid sometimes that Christians do. I've done these things, not all of them that I'm going to mention, but I've done some of these things myself. And as I mention these things, if you realize, you know what, I've done that too, don't let that bitterness stay there. Realize that we can't justify speaking to each other like this. And we can't justify speaking about others like this. I'll tell you, I'll say this real quick. If somebody, if the president, whoever the president is at the time, if he does something that is awful, you can disagree with it as a Christian. You can even speak out against the wickedness that's being done. But if you start name calling and saying so-and-so is an idiot and a fool, you think that's going to make him change? I couldn't imagine being president and I'm like, man, all these people are calling me an idiot on Facebook. I think I'm going to go change what I'm doing. Because they're so loving and kind-hearted. Look at all of the great things they have to say. But we're not saying good things about anybody. Now, that's not us. You guys may already know what I'm talking about. Now, I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to see if I get the same reaction that I got at another congregation. everybody here may not know what a meme is. Very simple. It's a picture with some kind of animation in the background and some kind of funny saying that goes along with it that somehow fits the picture itself. And sometimes they're sarcastic. Sometimes they are completely fine and wholesome, but they're kind of funny. And there was a meme that had Bugs Bunny. He was up out of a hole. You probably know who Bugs Bunny is, Looney Tunes. He's popped up out of this hole like this, and he's getting ready to give us some words of wisdom. And he says, I really think it's time to take the warning labels off of everything and let stupidity work itself out of the gene pool. Okay. You guys were prepared. I got a few laughs one time when I said that, and I was like, oh, well, we're not supposed to be laughing at that. But you do have to admit that sometimes you see that, and sometimes you either laugh or you want to laugh. Because in some ways, we agree, there are a lot of foolish things going on. There are people that say crazy things that you and I are like, how can anybody on this world believe what this person is saying? That's the same people Jesus was dealing with. How could they not realize that when he was making the lame walk and giving blind people the ability to see and resurrecting people from the dead, how could they not see that he's not God? But he didn't go around insulting them all. He was still trying to save those people that said the most illogical, craziest, and wildest things on earth. And I think that you will admit with me, there's nothing loving about that meme I just read to you. Let stupidity work itself out of the gene pool. There was nothing loving about that example I gave with Don about, well, you disagree with me? How could you say something so foolish? You're a fool, Don. Because that's not the way Jesus taught us to interact with people. There were some other very hateful things. During the time that there were a mix of protest and riots, on Facebook, I'm just going to keep using Facebook. That's the main social media platform that I use. There were videos taken of some of these. And some of them were riots. There were buildings on fire. Some people lost their lives in these things. And I saw one video where people were just acting illogical. I thought it was crazy what they were doing. But I just watched it for a couple of minutes, and I started getting really angry at the people on the video. You probably can relate to that. You've probably seen something somewhere on a video that's made you angry. But it didn't stop there. I started thinking certain thoughts about those people. And I started noticing that the next feeling that was in my heart was hatred for people that I had never met and did not know. Now, some of the things that were done were crimes. Now, I'm not giving an excuse for that. And I'm not saying that people should not experience punishment for their crimes. But sometimes people were responding and saying, I hope that so-and-so experiences the full extent of the law. Now, what they're talking about is I want them to experience the harshest judgment that the judge can give somebody. And there might be some times when I'm thinking to myself, I feel like that too. So, if we're going to go back and look at Leviticus 19, it says, love your neighbor as yourself. That means I got to think of what if I was in that position? Or what if it was my child? Now, you may say, and you may be right, now I wouldn't be in that position. My child wouldn't go do that. Well, first of all, I would say that you can't know that for sure because you did not grow up in the situation that this other person did. You haven't had their experiences. You don't know all the reasons they're reacting why they're reacting. Evil is evil, for sure, but you still don't know everything about that person. So what if it was your teenage child. Let's say it was your 16-year-old son, and he was participating in this, and you're looking at that video, and all of a sudden you're like, uh-oh. You're real angry about it, and then you're like, why is my son out there? And then you see somebody saying, boy, I can't wait until that boy gets the full extent of the law. Or he's 18, maybe considered not a minor anymore. Now, you may still say, well, my son needs some punishment for his crime. Because you got to have discipline. But I have a feeling that most people would change their attitude about it if it were a friend, a family member, a child, and especially themselves. Because I'm just going to tell you, I've never been in court facing a jury and lawyers trying to convict me of something. But if they were going to, I'm going to tell you, I sure would want some merciful lawyers and jurors and a judge. But that doesn't mean that I want them to just let me off scot-free. That's not what I'm saying. If I broke the law, I broke it. But man, I would hate for just the whole courtroom to be like, boy, I can't wait till Neil gets punished. But it's worse than that. It's thousands and hundreds of thousands and even Christians saying, man, I can't wait until these people get what they deserve. It's pretty rough. What I want is what's best for their spiritual life. Now, if that is some consequences, they need them. But if I were in their shoes, I would want people to call for mercy instead of justice. Other than that, people are still actually talking about vaccines. And like I said, I'm not going to give you my opinion about it. I'm just going to say this. Even if you've done your research and you are just absolutely convinced that you're right, and maybe you are, it's not going to help to call the people on the other side idiots. It's not going to help to tear your brother or sister down in the church because they're not thinking like you. And guys, they might not, maybe they're not thinking clearly. I don't know. But they're not going to see through all that cloudiness and fogginess or whatever it is if I insult them and act like they're my enemy. But that's exactly what Proverbs says that hatred is going to do. It's going to stir up strife and division. And so I'm not saying that I got on Facebook and every Christian I know is posting a bunch of hateful stuff about people. But boy, I saw some really kind-hearted and loving people saying some of the craziest stuff. And maybe I was a little more concerned about it myself because I was like, well, I'm a preacher, and if I say something on there, it's going to get passed around real quick. But I'll say this one last thing about that. Now, I've given you an overabundance of examples. We have a real small church in Somerville, and so with that, we have a little Facebook Messenger group. And one of our members posted a little banner with some words on it and said, "Is this the wrong attitude?" That was their question. Now, here's what was posted. "My problem is I want to follow Jesus and slap people too." Now, in a way, that sounds funny. And there was a discussion about that. And I said what I believe everybody was thinking. I said, well, that's definitely not okay. It just makes Christians look like a bunch of angry, grumpy people. I don't think Jesus walked around with the attitude that, man, I'd love to slap these people and save them at the same time. Now, humanity made Jesus angry. When the Pharisees were turning a place of worship into a business and Jesus drove them out, he did that. Now, that doesn't give us, we can't drive people out with scourges, but when he did that was for zeal for God's house and his dwelling. He loved those people, and he was trying to save them. Could you imagine just that right there? If Jesus had a Facebook page, I'm not sure he would. But if Jesus had a Facebook page and he said, man, I really want to do right, but I also want to slap people, I don't think that's the Savior that you and I want to follow. I can't imagine being one of the 12 apostles and walking around with Jesus for 3 years while he's healing all these people, and he's just walking around huffing and puffing about how terrible everybody is. He already knows that the world is filled with wickedness. There are things going on right here in the United States that are the worst possible sin that a human could commit. And I get angry about it sometimes. But when that anger turns into hatred, I'm going to lose the mission. My mission and Christ's mission was to draw people to Him. And I want you to turn to Jeremiah 31 with me. Jeremiah 31, starting in verse 1, says this. Now, Jesus, if you've gone through and read the prophets, what you get is an example of God being merciful for so long and calling out to people and saying, hey, if you go in this direction, this is going to happen to you. Please turn around and come back to me. And the prophets are just full of this. Please, please come back. And they're following idols, and they're cheating one another, and murdering, and all the horrible things. And this is what Jesus says. At that time, declares the Lord, I will be the God of all the families of Israel, and they shall be my people. Thus says the Lord, the people who survived the sword found grace in the wilderness. In Israel, when it went to find its rest, the Lord appeared to him from afar, saying, I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore, I have drawn you with loving kindness. The way that I got this Jesus, the way that Jesus got people to Him was that when they were the worst, most horrible people that nobody else loved and everybody else hated, I still love you. Now that doesn't mean He's saying, and you just live whatever sinful life you want, you can be saved. That's not it. But it was, I still want to save you. I don't care how far you've gone. I can still get you back. The kind of love that Jesus offered people was everlasting. That means it never stops, right? It doesn't take a break. It doesn't Jesus come over to the side for a minute and say, man, I hate all of these people. And vent all that out and then come back and say, okay, I'm back. It was Jesus 24/7 all the time, ever since the creation, seeing Cain kill Abel and still trying to save Cain. And that's how He drew them. Matthew chapter 5, I don't have to remind anybody of, where Jesus says, love your enemies. Now that's easy for me because most of the time my enemies are somebody that may say some kind of, offhanded comment at me because I'm a Christian, which doesn't even happen that often to me. That's pretty easy for me to just say, I still hope that they come to Christ. You imagine being a Christian when Paul was murdering Christians? When Rome was imprisoning people and taking family members away from other people? When you watch Stephen be stoned to death? When you watched Paul breathing threats and just filled with a passion to rid you from this earth, and Jesus says, I need you to love that person. And I'm like, I don't think I can do that. And most of the time, the people that we're talking about are not doing those things to us. We're just angry. We're angry about all the wickedness that's happened, and rightfully so. Wickedness is the reason that we have sorrow and death and all this pain that we talked about that is only going to go away in heaven. But in Luke chapter 6, I'm just trying to drive the point home. I think you already know it. In Luke chapter 6, verse 35, Jesus says, but love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, For he himself, now here's our example to follow. We talked about in Bible class that when this life is over, we will be like Jesus. We're supposed to start trying right now. And he says, for he himself is kind to ungrateful and evil men. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. When you are around other Christians, when you and I are around other Christians and we're like, well, I know that both of us hate this thing. Let's talk about it and get all angry about it. We're not building and edifying one another up. We're tearing Christ's work down. And it's so easy to type a few things and click enter real quick. I found this is a lot easier for me to do that than to say it to somebody. We're doing evil. Jesus went as far as saying calling somebody a fool means you're guilty of hell. That is scary to me. I'm like, I didn't murder anybody. Yeah, but you might not mind if somebody else did. And that's what hatred does. You might not be the person that's going out and harming the other individual, but it sure wouldn't bother you if somebody else did. That's not Jesus. In John 3:16, we are told that God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. In Romans chapter 5, we're told that he died for sinners. In Ephesians chapter 2, he mentions that all those people who had become Christians had formerly lived a wicked and evil life. And this as well, and I think that this may hit home for some of us. In Romans chapter 12, had you ever had somebody in your life that you're not very fond of, and at some point you say, and you may say this to them, you may say it behind their back, well, bless your heart. Now, there's nothing wrong with the statement, bless your heart. But a lot of people say that sarcastically, hoping that something bad happens. You're not wanting the person to be blessed. You don't like the person. Romans chapter 12, verse 9 says, let love be without hypocrisy. That means I've got to sincerely work on loving somebody like King Manasseh. Sincerely. I don't even know how to do that without Jesus. Maybe we can end it on this. Earlier we mentioned that Manasseh, he was just about next in line to Satan's throne. If Satan had a son, Manasseh sure fit the bill. He was a terrible person. And Jesus warns Manasseh to stop what you're doing. And Manasseh still doesn't listen. And then an army comes in and takes him by hooks and captures him. And it says when he was in distress, he called out to the Lord. Well, of course you called out to the Lord in your distress, right? That's our attitude. Sure you did. Things are going bad. Now you want to talk to God. And that would probably be our attitude. But it said when he repented, God heard his prayer. And Manasseh returned to the Lord. Because God drew him, not by calling him a fool, not by talking about how awful Manasseh is and hating Manasseh in his heart. God wanted to save him, and he drew him in with loving kindness. This morning, I have a feeling that somebody has either participated in this or has experienced it from somebody else. Because it's very easy to dwell on the evil things and let them affect us. And Jesus calls us to a higher calling, to love the worst kind of people in this world, because for a time you and I were the worst kind of people in this world. I think that we all know that lesson. I hope that this, once again, has not been to anybody personally. I don't know what you say and do around your friends and family. But if you have let that bitterness turn into hatred and talking like that about people, then today's a good time to change it. This morning, I don't know how many visitors you have or if everybody here has already been baptized into Christ and you're walking faithfully, and I hope that's what the case is. But what we read earlier was that Jesus came and died for people because we were separated from Him because of sin. And He has given us a very simple way back to Him. To be reconciled to Christ, to have our sins washed away, it is as simple as confessing Him as the Son of God, repenting, turning away from those sins, and being baptized in water for the forgiveness of sins. That may be your need this morning, or if you need the prayers of the church or any other encouragement, we ask that you come forward as we stand and sing.
Waiting at the home, He will vanish gently to His fold. See Him soul and will come. Oh, Lord, why be Jesus waiting at the door? Open up His softly, softly, Lord. Hear Him soul and will come. I am Lord. Why be Jesus fleeing at the door? He would be your Savior ever and evermore. Love and soul and no bound. Lord, why be Jesus knocking at the door? Soon He'll cease His pleading, yes, forevermore. Come, your soul, longing in, Lord. Very good, right? Very easy to be entangled in spatial politics, say things that we shouldn't say to other people. And I was in politics for 12 years, and I know people don't always agree with you, and you don't always agree with them. 244 over the sunset sea. Darkness is falling, the night is high. Shadows are on the lee. Voices of fragrance are beckoning now over the sunset sea. Soon I shall journey to heaven, my home, and from all sorrow be free. Our everlasting, our light away over the sunset sea. When my long journey on this earth is o'er, dear Lord, I'm coming to Thee, ever to rest in that heavenly home over the sunset sea. Soon I shall journey to heaven, my home, and from all sorrow be free. Harbor life clean, our light the way over the sunset sea. That's right. Dear merciful and heavenly Father, thank you for allowing us to come together once again to sing songs and praises to your name. Worship you. Thank you for your name, for the lessons that He's presented to us. Take His word for it. Thank you for allowing all of us safe travels to here. We ask that you would